For anyone who grew up in the 90s, the fond memories of the internet's first foothold into your life are always a warm welcome. It felt like a simpler time, yet wildly outrageous given the unregulated space. But the internet during the mid to late 90s period of time had a unique and undeniable charm that we've seen make a comeback in various ways, most recently through the vaporwave movement. Or, for the purposes of this review, Hypnospace Outlaw, which, for all intents and purposes, feels like a wacky simulator of internet in the late 1990s. Hypnospace Outlaw was brought to us by the creators of Dropsy and published by indie strong publishers No More Robots, who have brought us some runaway successes like Not Tonight, Descenders, and Nowhere Profit. The game is a point-and-click puzzle adventure that follows your journeys across a familiar landscape of early internet history, albeit set in an alternate dimension where 1999 is similar to reality, but dystopian to a degree that separates it from reality. You are tasked to be an enforcer on Hypnospace, an internet landscape that takes place within the dreamscape of its users. Enforcers act as, well, internet police, enforcing rules and regulations put forward by the creators of the platform to keep things safe and sanitized. At the start of the game, we're joining Hypnospace and its creators as they prepare for the dreaded Y2K scare. Definitely something that we've all heard of, even if we weren't all there to live through it. I was. I remember buying canned goods on the off chance that maybe something bad would happen. And I remember sitting up when the clock turned over to the year 2000 and absolutely nothing happened. I distinctly recall typing to my friends on the internet at the time, "Well, still here, LOL." What a time to be alive. Anyway, Hypnospace Outlaw does a tremendous job of bringing the player back to this period of time, both with its aesthetic and its wonderfully clever writing. Playing the game involves sifting through dozens of user web pages to find clues, enforce violations, and keep things in line within the rules and regulations laid out by Hypnospace and its creators. While that is not something many of us are familiar with having to do on the internet, hence the dystopian nature of its themes, we're all not too unfamiliar with having browsed our fair share of terribly laid out, far too informative personal web pages from the Yahoo and GeoCities era of time. This is really where Hypnospace Outlaw shines the most. It feels like opening up a time capsule to the year 1999, even if it is set in an alternate universe. To quote Tool, "It seems like I've been here before. It seems so familiar." It's hard to say, even as I did a bit ago, that the game shines the most in one specific area, because the entire experience, and it definitely is an experience worth having, is kind of this blooming onion of themes that harken back to the golden age of the internet. Each layer you peel has a subtly delicious subtext that most will pick up on, and many will appreciate more than others depending on how well you resonate with the subject matter. I felt like I was getting to know a lot of the characters in Hypnospace as I crawled through their web pages, watched their updates, scrolled through their forum postings, and ultimately had to decide whether or not to report them or let them slide. Similar to how Stranger Things ticks all the boxes as a TV show for people that comes out of the 80s, it really strikes close to home for people who grew up with the 80s nostalgia factor, though. Hypnospace Outlaw does this well on so many levels for the internet age and people from the 90s. Now, I haven't gotten to the core of the story yet in this review. I just can't stop talking about and praising the design of the game as a whole to dissect it further. So let me try to separate from my fangirling for a second and give some brief but serious consideration towards the story and the gameplay. As I stated earlier, the story involves the player enforcing rules laid out by MerchantSoft, a hip Silicon Valley startup run by siblings who created the HypnoS that make all of this tick. It starts quite simple. You're tasked with flagging copyright infringement policies against people who use the likeness of an old cartoon named Gumshoe Goober. But you progress further into difficult, morally gray territory as the game goes on. Puzzles become more complex, and you're tasked to think more creatively with the minimal tools you're given as an enforcer to uncover what could be a massive conspiracy deep at the core of the entire Hypnospace itself. This potentially seedy underbelly is interweaved amongst a slew of Hypnospace pioneers, laying out their worlds in the form of scary stories, time-appropriate music, Hypnospace lingo, a lot like memes, and vibrant personalities splayed all across the browser page. The game really opens itself up around the midpoint, When Hypnospace draws closer to Y2K, and evolutions of your actions of the initial copyright infringement questline shape what becomes the Hypno landscape. Entire sections of the site become broken up and segregated, groups become fractured and shoot off on their own, and then you're given more opportunities to root deeper into the darker, more illicit side of Hypnospace. I'm not talking about an adult-based pornographic side, thankfully, but more so what would be the mirror image of piracy and torrenting in the real world. This was personally my favorite part of the game, because puzzles became a lot more complex and the kind of linear thinking that you're often asked to do in games like this was really turned on its ear. I spent a great amount of time trying to figure out a few of the puzzles, and a couple of them were definitely difficult to do without the help of my live Twitch chat. The rewarding feeling of figuring these challenges out was well met, however, and the game had its own unique ways of rewarding you with its witty dialogue and on-point aesthetic. Honestly, I have absolutely nothing bad to say about this game. People who love indie games are gonna enjoy this title. People who love quirky point and clicks will eat this title up. People who live for 90s nostalgia will endure this with a smile and a sigh of relief. And people who love the good story experience of a game will find Hypnospace Outlaw to be the refreshing little title that they've needed in their life. I can't recommend it enough. Hypnospace Outlaw is available for PC, Mac, and Linux.